So I have a special guest. We have Tim Riesterer, Corporate Visions, Chief Strategy Officer. I have watched him present a million times, and I'm always amazed at what he can do to engage the audience and showcase the importance. Again, we keep hammering this point, sales and marketing integration. So his fun fact, he likes the theater, and his favorite character to play in the theater, the lion from The Wizard of Oz. So, I'd like to bring him up, thank him, and watch him rock and roll.
So I'm not sure where to go with the fun fact. Maybe we'll save that for the end of the presentation. But my number was 69. I'm just going to go with that. I've got two numbers that I actually want to show you here. 74 and 26. Jamie shared this number earlier, these numbers, and these are really Laura's numbers from Forrester. 74 is the percentage of executive buyers who say they give the business to the company that created the buying vision. In other words, the company that inspired them to see the need to change and do something different. 26% of buyers say they give the business in a fair and square bake-off, a la British bake-off style. Now you might be saying, we have a greater percentage of sales that go to RFP and bake-offs, and I would say you probably do, but only 26% of them are fair. That's the deal, right? So the big opportunity is the company who can be right here, creating a buying vision, inspiring someone to make a decision to change and do something different. Now, so I want to give you these two numbers and now ask you this question. What percentage of the content you create, the messages and content you create for marketing and sales, helps inspire and build a buying vision to change and do something different versus answer this question over here, why they should pick you versus one of your competitors? I hazard to guess that it is the exact opposite of these two numbers. When we get engaged with companies, we see you spending most of your time building content and messages to answer the question, why us, not somebody else? In other words, to win the bake-off. And precious little time spent inspiring the market to do something different, make a change, and move forward. And I want to talk about this number right here and how you can do this on purpose versus by accident. And that's what we're going to do with our time together. So these are two very important numbers. The winner is here, but more often than not, the content and messaging you create lives over here. How can we fix that after today? So we got about 30 minutes to do that in. So that's my promise in this time that we have. The biggest challenge to creating why change, buying vision-oriented content is that the person you're talking to is probably in a position where they're not exactly sure they want to make this change that you've been talking about. The scientists call this the status quo bias. Now, I fancy myself an armchair scientist. I spend time with Stanford University professors in the decision-making sciences of behavioral science and social psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience. And what they've discovered is that people prefer not to change. Did you realize that we prefer not to change? Well, there's actually something you need to know about that so that when you build your messages, you don't just build content for the sake of content, you build content with a purpose. This is the part of what I've enjoyed so far this morning in listening to this was, we're all told, now here's where you should put some insights out that are engaging. Here's where the content thing comes in. And at some point we're all like, yeah, but what makes it insightful? What makes it good content? Because one of the things I've learned from all the technologies and all the tools that have been talked about today is that your message and your content can go many places much further and much faster than it used to in the past. But if your content sucks, all that does is speed up the sucking. So the challenge that I want to give you today is, let's fix that. Let's build content and messaging and insights on purpose that we know work. Well, you need to understand that if you're going to move somebody, they live somewhere. When you design your messages, you've got to beat up, destroy, and disrupt this thing called a status quo bias. There are 4 reasons your customers are living in status quo bias. so that when you create your content for your digital strategy, you can actually move them off of status quo bias, be the company that inspires the vision for change, and win 3 out of 4 times, which is better than most people's close rates as far as I know. So here are the 4 causes of status quo bias that you need to know as a marketer or a salesperson or an enabler, and build messages that defeat these causes that keep people in their status quo. Number 1, people stay in status quo because they have something called preference stability. When they made the last decision to get to here, they stabilized those preferences. And now, every time they hear something potentially different or new, they weigh that in regard to their current preferences. And if it's a little bit different and a little bit off, they try to stabilize their preferences by using I have 4 daughters, my 4 daughters' favorite word, like. That's like, I think I'm more or less doing it today. That seems a lot like all these other things I've been hearing about. This is kind of like our current approach. That's really what's happening, is people living in preference stability saying, I really don't want to change. And this thing you're talking about looks a lot like what I'm doing today, and they use that to justify and rationalize staying the same. The word like is your enemy. In other words, your message actually has to not reinforce their current preferences. Your messages actually have to destabilize their current preferences. If your message doesn't destabilize current preferences, there's a chance they're just not going to make a move. Second, this is my favorite. It's so human being-like. Anticipated regret and blame. So if I'm living here today and you've challenged my status quo, and I think about this idea of doing something new tomorrow, I start projecting myself over here, already getting all the blame for why this didn't go well. Over there, maybe things aren't great, but I'm still getting a paycheck, the lights are still on, nobody exactly knows where my cube is. But over here, if I make some change happen, this has the potential to go seriously wrong. Human beings' natural inclination is to project and anticipate the regret and blame after the change has happened that accrues to them. So in order to convince people to move from here to there, you've got to help them see themselves in their current scenario and see themselves succeeding in the new scenario by sharing examples of people who look just like them and have made this exact same move. The story of somebody in the same current state, struggling with the same issues and challenges, and how they've successfully navigated this change and come out on the other side as the hero, is your best friend in trying to get someone off of status quo, helping them see themselves in that story arc with examples of people in similar situations having made this move. If your messaging and your content and your insights don't contain that story, a hero story, to give them confidence, they're going to just anticipate regret and blame and say, it's better if I just hunker down over here. The third challenge is this idea of the cost of taking any type of action or the cost of change. The perception among your audience is that the status quo is free. What I'm doing today is a sunk cost. I don't have to think of a budget for this. It's now already rolled into my operating budget. I don't really have to think about retraining my people. They already know how to do this. I don't have to rip things out and put new things in. It's already done. So the status quo bias is there's a huge cost to making a change. There's a cost where I'm going to have to ask for more budget. I'm going to have to recruit and gain consensus among a bunch of people who don't normally get along and want to agree. I'm going to put my reputation on the line, and that's going to cost me time, effort, equity, stomach lining. I'm going to maybe have to rip some things out and put some things new in. I'm going to have to retrain some people. The entire cost burden is on change. The premise is status quo is free. Your secret for winning here is the idea that you have to show them that the cost of staying the same is actually greater than the cost of change. And most stories that I've seen only talk about the glorious potential benefit and upside of the change and don't do enough to help them see the cost of staying the same. To disrupt the status quo, they have to see there's an actual cost to staying the same. They got to see it as a cost on the personal side and the professional side. They can't see it as just a sunk operating thing that's just happening and the wheels are just going. That's the third challenge and the third thing your messaging and content and insights need to do. The fourth is this idea of selection difficulty. The challenge is that when you start talking to companies about what you do and how you do it, there's an immediate perception, rightfully so, that it sounds a lot like what they're already doing and a lot like everybody else. The amount of information that business decision makers have to consume in order to make a decision is doubling less than every 3 years. So the amount of content that's coming at me and messaging and information that I need to process to make a decision is so overwhelming that I can't tell the difference anymore. It all looks, smells, sounds, and tastes the same. So the difficulty of actually making a selection causes me to stick with the status quo because more or less I believe everything is the same. Your message, your insights have to share some contrast. They have to clearly contrast with the way they're doing things today and how it'll be different tomorrow. And they have to clearly contrast you and the competitive alternatives. Without the value of contrast, so the idea of contrast is value and the decision that there is or isn't value lives in this contrast. If I don't see much contrast between what I'm doing and what you're asking me to do, I'm not going to make that change. There's not enough contrast. There's not enough there for me to see the value of making the change. I only see risk. You have to see enough contrast between the current state and the future state and the alternatives for them to decide there's actually value. If your message does not have clear contrast depicted between the current state and the future state, you can't help them overcome this selection difficulty. So 4 problems, 4 opportunities. Preference stability, you must destabilize their current preferences, cause them to surprisingly see their current state as unsafe, unreliable, untenable, unacceptable. The idea of anticipated regret and blame, give them a hero story with similar scenarios where they see somebody just like them having succeeded making this change. The perceived cost of change, show them that the cost of staying the same is actually greater than the cost of change. And in selection difficulty, make sure they can see enough contrast between the way they're doing things today and the way they'll do it tomorrow, because value lives in contrast. So your insights and your content must contain these 4 ingredients if you want to be the why change, create a buying vision 74% champion. To help you further understand this, I want to give you an example. This example is something that we then tested with Stanford University. And the reason this example is so important is we chose something where the example would be based on selling something that was so highly commoditized, it would be really difficult to differentiate. And the example that we used in the work we did with Dr. Tormala at Stanford was this idea that, and I want you to position yourselves and think about this right now. You're all medium-sized business owners, and you've had success over the last 5-10 years. But you see a recession on the horizon. Now imagine that you see 3 business problems, critical business issues: slower sales, sluggish payments, and higher costs. And you need to run your business through these next few bumpy years, a $10 million line of credit. And you want to go to look at various banks and lending institutions to get that money and make a choice between various banks and lending institutions. Why did we choose this example? Because there's nothing more commoditized than money. I don't care what you sell today and you think you're in a parity market or a commodity market, if you lend $100 and your competitor lends $100, there's not a lot of difference. Now imagine you're the company that lends that $100 at a higher rate. That would be a sucky sales job. I'd like to give you the same $100 as my competitor, but charge you more. What do you think? You and me, we got something here? We worked with a company that was in that position. Their money was more expensive than everybody else's money, so they needed to differentiate and distinguish themselves. So what we did is test 4 different messages or insights, if you will, pitch type content in 3.5-minute videos against an audience of 400 people that we put in this position to have their small businesses moving into a recession. So 400 people, kind of like you, and we challenged them this way. We said, let's find out what's going to be more persuasive. A message that comes from a bank that leads with this idea that you might actually fail if you take my money. Or a message from a bank that says, we understand your 3 top critical business issues and your need for a line of credit. Let us talk about how we can solve for that and the value and benefits that you will receive. One, pretty intuitive, the other a little counterintuitive. And we recruited these 400 people and gave them the same scenario as I just gave you, and they got to watch 4 videos and choose the bank. What I want to do now is talk about the 4 videos. They were 3.5-minute videos. I'm in 30 seconds each. I'm going to walk you through the messages or the insights that were provided, the content that was provided. And I want you to pretend you're watching these same videos. Okay, scenario number 1, bank number 1, take 1. We understand your 3 business issues: sluggish sales, slower customer payments, and high inventory cost. We appreciate that you now have a need for $10 million to get you over the oncoming recession. We couldn't agree more. The economic times look a little difficult. We've run the numbers, and congratulations, we can give you that $10 million line of credit at a highly competitive rate. What you need to know also is that our bank has been in the business of serving this community for over 75 years. Not only that, we specifically have an emphasis in small to medium businesses just like you. 60% of our portfolio, the majority of people we work with, look just like you, so we understand you and can solve your problems. And seen. So the idea there was you would respond to the stated known customer needs that maybe you determined in your diagnostic questioning or voice of the customer research, right? Respond directly to those customer-centric needs, share your solution, and then credential your organization. Not an atypical presentation, right? Bank number 2 shows up, and you hear the pitch. Hey, we understand you have 3 business needs: slow sales, sluggish customer payments, and high inventory cost. And you have a need for $10 million to get you through this bumpy economy, which we agree is coming. And you need $10 million to bridge you through the recession. Good news is we've done the research and the analytics. You can get that $10 million from our bank, and we can do it at a highly competitive rate. Oh, by the way, we've been in business for over 75 years. What bank hasn't, right? We are specialists in small to medium businesses just like yours. But the one thing that sets us apart, that really makes us different, is we have these series of on-staff experts who understand the needs of small to medium businesses, from the back office and supply chain to inventory and accounting to managing through the front office, employee relations, sales issues, marketing-related issues. We can help you. And we can do that with these on-staff experts so that we can tailor your services. We aren't like those banks that give you cookie-cutter services. We're going to customize them to meet your needs. And seen. That's called identifying the customer's business issues and then introducing your value-added services as differentiation. Not atypical, right? Third, bank. Hey, we understand your 3 business issues: slow sales, sluggish customer payments, and the fact that you're having high cost problems. And you need $10 million to get you over the economic downturn. Good news is we've run the analytics. You can get $10 million from our bank at a highly competitive rate. Did you know that we are in the business for over 75 years? But what maybe you didn't know is that fully 42% of companies that take a loan during a recession, like you're about to do, actually still fail, even though they took money during that recession. And the reason they fail is because there were hidden problem areas that you didn't know about, and you started throwing good money after bad process, and you still are at risk of going out of business. That's why we have on-staff experts to make sure that doesn't happen with your organization. We're going to make sure you're not a statistic by analyzing your operation, finding those hidden problem areas, and make sure that all the money you take from our bank is going after a good situation and making sure you are not one of those 2 that fails. And seen. This was the idea of identifying customer business needs, but introducing an unconsidered need that they had no idea about. Ready? Number 4. Hey, we're here to talk about the oncoming recession and the loan you need to bridge you through the recession. But before we do that, we actually want you to know one thing, because this is critically important that you know. Over almost half of companies that take a loan from banks like us during a recession actually still fail. In fact, that number is 42%. It's a startling, scary statistic, and we don't want you to become one of those statistics. That's why we have on-staff experts who are going to review your operations and identify and make sure there are no hidden problem areas, and make sure that any money you take from us is going to put you in a better position to succeed coming after. Yes, by the way, we can give you that $10 million line of credit. We've run the numbers. We can do that at a slightly higher than average market rate, but still a very fair rate. Oh, by the way, we've been in business for 75 years and seen. Okay, 4 examples of 4 pieces of content. You were part of the audience that was making this decision, right? You have a company and you need a loan from a bank. First question I want to ask you is, when you think of your messaging and the way it's structured today and your content as you give it to customers, which of these sounds most like yours? Or if you're not willing to admit that, maybe most like your competitors. The first one, where you identify and restate back to the customer the needs that you uncovered, and then credential your organization. Raise your hands if that's the most common approach. Well, just a few. No judgment here. The second one, identify the needs of the customer, read those back to them, explain your solution, and then introduce differentiated, value-added services that you believe distinguish you from your competitors. Raise your hand. All right, that's like 60% of the room. How many of you in your pitches or your competitors' pitches identify the customer's known needs, talk about your solution, and then introduce something the customer didn't know? Anybody put your hand up for that one? 1 or 2 or 3. What about the fourth one? You stand up and say, hey, before we talk about anything that you've told us, we would like to tell you something you didn't already know, and introduce an unconsidered need to open, and then eventually get to responding to the known needs that they told you. How many do your pitches like that? 1 or 2 or 3. Okay? Now, here's the question. We went in and we did research on these 400, and we asked them many questions about which of these had the greatest differentiation, which pitch stood out, was remarkable, memorable, all goals we have, right? The thing that really grabbed you. Which of these pitches was the highest quality? You perceived the bank or the product to be the highest quality. And then more importantly, we ask a whole host of attitude and choice questions about who you would choose, why you would choose, would you be willing to pay more, et cetera, et cetera. So there were dozens of questions, there were sub-questions under this, but we really wanted to get to the point where we got people distinguishedly declaring their intent. Now my question is, which one won? The first one that spoke to the customer business needs and credentialed themselves, raise your hand. The second one that spoke to the customer's business need and introduced value-added capabilities as a differentiator. Okay, so that's the one the room picked. 60% said you do it that way. I see no hands up as a winner. This is not good news right now, right? We're having a moment. Whoa. What about the third one? Respond to the customer's known business needs, but then introduce an unconsidered need. Did that one win? Raise your hands. All right, so we got a smattering, maybe 20%. I'm assuming the other 80% believe that number 4, the one that came up and introduced a need they hadn't even thought of before responding to their stated needs, was the winner. Yes? Raise your hands. Now, was that because you felt that? Did you just feel it? There was a reason I walked through the 3 business pains every time. Because if you were being pitched by a company that had done their voice of the customer research on what your needs were, or had done discovery question on what your needs were, you could pretty much be guaranteed all those companies would play those back for you. What did it start to sound like? It started to sound the same. Didn't you start to think, oh, these guys are the same as everybody else? Yet at some point, this is what we're telling everybody to do with their messaging. Identify the customer's needs through voice of the customer research and diagnostic questioning, and then play that back for them to show them how much you know about them and how much you care about them and how customer-centric you are. But at some point you were like, oh, I've seen this show before. Everybody picked the fourth one, yet it was the most different, the most startling, and I think I saw one hand go up to say, this is the way we actually do it today. So apparently we all innately, viscerally know which one's better, but we choose not to do it. That's the challenge I'm hearing today. Guess what? Here's the winners. In the area of presentation uniqueness, we all want to be seen as different, unique, remarkable, memorable, differentiated. You can get a 50% bump in uniqueness, the perception that you are unique, you are different, just by introducing an unconsidered need into the story, something they didn't expect or suspect. When you want to put an insight out there, potentially the worst thing you can do is do voice of the customer research and then tell them that's their problem. And they're like, I knew that. I'm the one who told you. No surprise there. And we're thinking that's insightful. when in reality, as we'll find out, maybe not so much. You need to introduce an unconsidered need in order to be seen as different. Now we ask the question, though, in terms of quality, the perception of the bank or the products and services as high quality, look what happened. Now there was no statistical difference between the first 3 vignettes. But there was a 10% bump in perception of the quality of the vendor and the quality of the offering based on simply rearranging your story and telling them something they didn't already know about a problem or opportunity they didn't even know they had, but leading with that. Interestingly enough, if you did the same thing, but you put it on the end, you didn't get any value out of that in terms of the perception of quality. But you don't care about differentiation or quality. At some point, you have bosses that only care about whether or not people's attitudes and choices were affected. Here are the numbers on that. Unconsidered needs first, once again, a 10% bump in people's willingness to engage and willingness to make a decision, even pay more, when you introduce something they didn't expect or know at the beginning. Why do I tell you this whole story? Why do I show you this research? Well, the idea of persuasion, the idea of creating a buying vision, the idea of moving someone off of status quo bias, the idea of moving someone to change and do something different is freaking hard. And you need to know what it's going to take to get them there, and then you need to do it in a way that will cause them to be persuadable. And with Dr. Tormala, who's an expert in persuasion, he's got like a PhD in persuasion, which I didn't know was a thing. And the point is, I never meet him in person because I don't want to have to look him in the eyes. I'm just not going to trust what goes on there. One time I told him, I said, I bet you your wife never wins an argument. And he said, we never fight. And I said, precisely. But a PhD in persuasion, he said, basically, here's the point. Highlighting and introducing an unconsidered need is unexpected. And unexpected is required to get someone into a persuadable mode. To move them off of status quo bias and certainty, you must introduce something unexpected. You must make them a little uncertain. But it only helps when it comes to actual persuasion when you do it at the beginning of your message. Because when it happens at the end, it's already too late. Because everything they heard at the beginning sounded the same as everyone else. They had moved to a place psychologically of certainty. And certainty is your enemy. I'm certain this sounds the same. I'm certain they pretty much do the same. Persuasion requires uncertainty. So I want to give you this little handy-dandy tool to help you remind yourself when you're in a messaging room and you want to create something and say, now that's an insight, and be able to say, now that's not an insight. That will move somebody off of status quo because it's unexpected and creates uncertainty. That will just confirm their certainty. I want you to go into a room and be able to have this discussion. It's called red box, green box. Very simple. Here's the idea. Voice of the customer research and discovery questions identify exactly the same business issues as your competitors did. And then when you align those identified business needs with certain key capabilities of yours, more than likely you're going to match up similar capabilities as everybody else did. Following me? Because your portfolios are fairly similar. So if you have the same needs identified, you're going to map them to similar capabilities, and then what's going to happen? You're going to end up what I call a commodity conversation. But what happened? I did everything right. I've been taught to identify customer needs and then map my capabilities to that because then I have a solution. That's a value prop right there. But the challenge is that everybody's been doing the same thing, and your story is actually now a commodity story even though you thought you did it right. This is what I see most companies do because they call an emergency at this point. Our stories aren't making a difference. How are we going to make this, happen? They start introducing the so-called value-added capabilities. What I love about that is we all were taught, introduce the value-added capabilities, the things that make us different. That will help people understand and appreciate why we're unique and we'll win more. Where did that come from, and whoever tested that? We just tested it, and it proved that it actually was worse in terms of differentiation. Here's the reason why. The psychology behind this is called choice overload. Watch it on YouTube. There's a lot of people doing science around this. The perception of your value-added services is not that they add value. The perception is that adds cost and that adds complexity. Doesn't add value, it adds cost and complexity. Gee, that's why you cost so much more, because you got more doohickeys. That's why I could potentially not choose this because I might fail. The more complex it is, the harder it is, there's more failure points in it. Value-added services are not value-added services. They're cost add, complexity add. So I would tell you, your story lives out here. Those services are interesting to the customer, just like your on-staff experts and your ability to assess their situation is interesting, only if there's a need for it. By introducing that 42% of companies that didn't survive despite taking the money, and then telling them that that's why you have on-staff experts who can assess that and ensure their survival, took something from a value-added service that they could care less about and turned it into something invaluable and indispensable. Your opportunity to drive insights is not just giving somebody a surprising piece of data that sets their hair on fire. That, to me, is just being a jerk. At some point, you got to set their hair on fire and have a bucket of water ready. Your story and opportunity is to introduce some risk that you can resolve. We've done 5 studies now, and one about risk and resolution that I don't have time to go into today. 5 studies with Stanford. We're doing 1 a quarter now. And I want you to know that there is power in the unconsidered need. But when that unconsidered need leads to something that you can actually fix. What we've been able to show is both from an emotional response and persuadability. If you can't resolve the thing you just got them all hopped up about, they're very frustrated with you. Once you get them excited, you have to take them someplace. And that's how you build insights that actually incite behavior change versus just excite. So what I want to leave you with in conclusion here is, I'm going to have to skip past that because my time is up. I want to talk about these guys right here. On the left is a man named Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point, very famous book. I've read it, you've read it. He made millions of dollars on that book. He now gets $150,000 for a 1-hour speaking engagement. I didn't charge Jamie nearly that much. And at my booth back there, I have 3 of our latest books there, and we're going to let you fight over that. So I'm going to give 3 books away for free at the booth. So Malcolm Gladwell, he makes you buy his books. So not only does he charge a lot of money, he makes you buy his books. Guess what? The Tipping Point wasn't even his idea. The guy over here on your right is a guy named Morton Grodzins, who identified the concept of the tipping point. He published on it, he wrote about it, he did the research to prove it, he even named it The Tipping Point 40 years before Malcolm Gladwell's book. Malcolm Gladwell sold us all a 40-year-old unoriginal idea, and we made him rich. What was the difference? The product was the same. The tipping point. One guy had a 40-year head start as the innovator. All day long, we're like, product team, would you please come up with some innovations? We want a breakthrough. Then we can sell. Malcolm Gladwell took a 40-year-old unoriginal idea and sold the snot out of it. What was the difference? I would suggest that Gladwell just told a better story. Gladwell told a better story. You need to tell a better story. But I don't want to just tell you to tell a better story. I just told you how to tell a better story. So that tomorrow, if you took the tip that I gave you today, you can be Gladwell and not Grodzins. Now, the only problem I have is that Malcolm Gladwell has now gone on to be rich and famous, and he just published his 5th book called David and Goliath. He's now ripping off God. Thank you very much.